The snow was gently falling outside as I placed the last ornament on the tree. This would be my first Christmas without James, and I was overwhelmed by the emptiness of our family mansion. My husband of 15 years died 3 months ago, leaving me with nothing but memories and a broken heart, even though his family still doesn't know full ownership of everything he owned. Barbara's shrill voice interrupted my memories. Why do we have all these new decorations on the Christmas tree, when the antique decorations in our house should be in the most prominent place? In a week's time Christine and her husband Tom had moved in too, and they were both suddenly very concerned about the family's possessions. What they didn't know was that James had predicted this. They'd try to throw you out. He warned me about matches on his deathbed. Promise me you'll be ready. I promise, though at the time I thought he was being overly concerned, and now, as I watched Barbara rearranging the tree to her own taste, I could understand his concerns. I understood his concerns too good to be true. The doorbell rang. It was probably the caterer for tomorrow's Christmas Eve dinner. I found myself face to face with Victoria, James' ex-fiancée from 20 years ago. Victoria. Barbara rushed forward and embraced her. I'm so glad you're here. I stood in the doorway dumbfounded as Christina looked at me with a smile on her face. She was here for Christmas Eve dinner. Barbara sighed playfully. Everything was so perfectly planned before things changed. Before he met me, she means before this rich man's son fell in love with a scholarship winner who valued love over social status. I used the EXE to get myself to the kitchen, needing to be alone for a while. As I leaned against the counter, I heard their voices drifting in from the dining room. Dear Barbara replied softly, saying, "The lawyer assured me that without a clear will, the property will go to the family and we'll have her out by New Year's." I couldn't help but smile, even though James had known what they would do and let them think they had won. Barbara spent the morning directing the staff to get ready for the evening's party, while Christina and Victoria pored over old photo albums, reminiscing aloud about James' life before me. The past year has been hard for all of us. Losing James, she pauses, it's left a void that can never be filled, but tonight we're going to start the healing process and get things back in order. My heart is pounding. That's it, Emma. She turns to me, her smile sharp as a knife. You've been very accommodating in the past few months, but now it's time for honesty. This house, this legacy belongs to the Carter family. I took the envelope and didn't open it. You told me to leave tonight, Barbara continued. We've packed your things. I noticed a couple of suitcases sitting on the doorstep. They've planned it perfectly. Throw me out on Christmas Eve in front of everyone. It's snowing out there. J. This place is ours. H. Now Christina's composure has finally crumbled. You never belonged here. Victoria comfortingly placed a hand on Barbara's shoulder. It's for the best. James will want this house back the way it was, I said calmly, grabbing my coat. I was leaving. Barbara announced to the room, "Don't worry about the legal details, dear. Our lawyer will contact you after the holidays." I paused in the doorway, turned around one last time and said softly, "Merry Christmas, and I'll see you soon." I made 2 calls, first to Marcus Chin, James' personal attorney for the last 10 years, and they did. I told him it was just as James had predicted, Christmas Eve. Marcus sounded disgusted. The timing was just right. As I ended the call at 5 o'clock early on the morning of the 26th and pulled into the heated garage of the hotel, a man from the valley rushed over to help me with my bag, the real one with all the really important stuff in it, not the one they had prepared in my suite in an elaborate decoy bag. I opened my laptop to the final part of James' plan, the one he'd spent his last few months preparing for, documenting every illegal transaction his family had hidden over the years, every scheme they'd used to maintain their honored image. I smiled, remembering how determined he'd been, even as his health deteriorated and he'd known that his family would try to erase me out of his life, just as they'd tried to prevent us from getting married all those years ago. I smiled, remembering how determined he'd been, even as his health deteriorated and he'd known his family would try to erase me from his life, just as they'd tried to prevent us from getting married. What they didn't know was that James had quietly transferred everything to my name months before his death. Barbara's systematic embezzlement of money from the family charitable foundation, Christine's elaborate insurance fraud, all of which had been carefully filed away, ready to be revealed in due course. I screenshotted every piece of information, added them to our evidence file, and had them celebrating in a week's time. One moment and their world would come crashing down. The snow was falling outside my luxury suite. I raised a glass of James' favorite "Merry Christmas, my love," I whispered. The week between Christmas and New Year's slipped by in careful preparations. Barbara and her cohorts celebrated their triumphs at my expense. And together with Marcus I set everything in motion as planned on the 26th of December, when two things happened at the same time. The first was Marcus filing the official documents of my ownership with video evidence of their Christmas Eve performance. The second was Detective Martinez presenting evidence of a financial crime that froze the foundation's accounts, and just as Barbara was attempting to transfer the large year-end bonus to herself, my phone rang early in the morning on December 30th. It was Christine. Her voice had lost its usual arrogance. Something must have gone wrong, she began. No preamble. The foundation's accounts were frozen. Mother couldn't touch anything. There was no mistake, I answered calmly. It's just karma. What have you done? She hissed at me. Nothing. Your mother's creative accountant finally caught up with her. Oh, and Christine, those insurance claims you filed last year, the investigator was interested in those too. She hung up a few minutes later. Barbara called you. Spiteful little witch, how dare you cause trouble for the foundation? Do you know who we are? Do you think he spent the last few months documenting everything? I don't want anything. I already own everything. The house, the foundation, the business interests. James legally and irrevocably transferred them all to me months ago. You had no right to do this. Marcus stepped forward, documents in hand. Mrs. Carter had all the rights. All rights were transferred to her by your son on June 15th. There were several witnesses present. James would never have done this, Christine protested. In fact, I interrupted. It was his idea. He knew exactly what you would do when he was gone. I realized the dawn on their faces. James had not only protected me, he'd also collected their years of criminal evidence. Mrs. Barbara Carter Martins continued. We have a warrant out for your arrest for embezzlement and fraud. This is ridiculous. Barbara looked around frantically. Victoria called Vincent. She means Victoria's husband, a prominent judge. Victoria won't be coming, I laughed. She's busy with her own legal troubles. You can't do this, she pleaded. We'll be ruined, just like you tried to ruin me. I asked her quietly, leaving me in the snow on Christmas Eve, packing my bag with my old clothes when I wasn't looking. We're all devastated, Tom protested. No, I corrected him, you're gloating. And over the next few hours I watched as they supervised the packing of their real luggage. And of course the proud Carters could only pack their designer luggage into the rental car and get ready to leave. Barbara turned around one last time and she said, he's my son. He spent his last months making sure that you wouldn't hurt me as much as you hurt him when he chose love over social status. After they left, I walked through the house, my house, remembering what James said at the final planning meeting. They'll never forgive me for choosing you, Kate said. Let them think they've won for a moment, and then show them why I'm falling in love with you. Your strength, your intelligence, your the ability to rise above their vile cruelty. A year after that snowy Christmas Eve, I threw a holiday party like no other, the mansion filled with people who worked for the foundation, beneficiaries of the foundation's programs, and friends who stood beside me, the Christmas tree glittering with a mix of antique and newfangled ornaments, each one representing a memory or hope for the future, something James would have loved. I want to help. I thought long and hard before I wrote back. Volunteers are needed for the adult literacy program. Don't be late. On Tuesday nights. 2 years after being thrown out into the snow, I stood in the lobby of the mansion and watched as yet another Christmas tree was decorated, but this time the decorations told a different story. Redemption, justice, turning suffering into purpose. Barbara and Christina had moved to a small town in another state. The mansion that they'd tried to take away from me had been transformed into a real charity and a real warm place where Fortune Abu was now serving the community. Their once proud name now stood for something of real value. My cell phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. The last appeal had been denied. It really was over. I smiled. I touched the wedding ring I still wore. They'll never understand, will they? James the first whispered. You didn't just leave me your property to me. You left me your strength, your integrity, and the power to set things right. I inherited James' true legacy where I belonged, not the superficial one his family insisted on. They thought that kicking me out of the house would be their victory, when it was the beginning of their downfall and my greatest triumph. James told me at the end that the best revenge is not just to prove them wrong, but to use their cruelty as a stepping stone to create something better than they could ever have imagined.